Welcome everyone for the first session of day 2 of track 1. This is about quantifying and qualifying the value and risk of open source in UC. We have a great set of speakers today. First of all, we have Georg Link, who's going to present on, I think I got this wrong though. I want to actually have, let's see, Adam speak first, because that sort of sets it out after my intro, and then Georg, and then Jennifer. Jennifer, I will introduce when it's her turn, but she did actually amazing work at Orca, and I'm really glad that she could join on short notice. And then after that, I want to open it for discussions. So the overview is, that universities really need to understand the value of open source and also the risk associated with it. And I think overall, I think the biggest motivation for me is that an understanding will increase the value of open source. We will find a lot of interesting things that we can build on top once we have actually an idea what the role of open source is within the university. And I mean really University of California. And we also will get a better understanding of how to do this not only at University of California, but at many other universities, right? So I think that will motivate essentially, I think, a watershed of activity where other universities suddenly wake up and say, well, we can do this too, entirely replicable methods. This will help universities to engage in ongoing global software regulation efforts. CRA, I mentioned yesterday, is one particularly scary example. Europe sees itself as sort of the regulator of the world because the United States is not doing that. And they are sometimes overly zealous. And you can sort of see other examples within the United States. California has that role for emissions, right? I'm not saying that's overly zealous, but it's basically stricter than any other regulation, and the industry follows suit because the market is large enough. And Europe has sort of the same property for the world. It's a large enough market that whatever regulation happens in Europe, people will follow along, right? Or try to follow along as best as they can, and also push back if they see that this has very negative effects. Then also, I think when we understand the role of open source software within the university, we will better be able to engage with stakeholders within and outside the university. This could be, outside open source communities or industry or funding agencies, or inside the university, just new kinds of collaborations between researchers that didn't really know of each other. The university environment within campuses and across campuses is very siloed. And so, anything that will actually bridge that, those silo walls is, I think, very valuable. And then having essentially a much larger toolkit for instructions, for research, for mentorship, and also for students to motivate to learn, right? There were discussions yesterday, for instance, that students really appreciate to motivate what they learn in a classroom, not only by a grade and by a degree, but also by having direct impact on a community. And so that can start with actually participating in a local research group, but it can also be having an impact on a much larger open source community. So today, I would like us to focus on two particular points. First is we are definitely in the discovery phase, right? We're trying to figure out how can we discover all these things in a practical, easy way, and what would those data products from our data collections or what might they look like? And then the second part is, what kind of new opportunities do these data products provide for research and leadership, right? Just sort of a brainstorming that will help basically motivate these efforts. We are very much in a cycle where we look for funding for some of these efforts, right? And I kind of like to, that's my experience within UC Santa Cruz, is that when you actually embed projects in real research research efforts, right, then you have a much higher chance of success than if it's just a service that some of them might or might not care about, right? And so actually, I really like this effort to be a research instrument for many projects, many research projects, but have also the side effect of being very informative for policymakers. So any questions really quickly about this? Okay. So I like to lead in, and it's probably psychologically, it's not exactly unbiased, but I have a bias and I like to put it forward because I think that'd be a useful bias. Many years ago in 1995, I wrote a short paper for CHI, CHI 95. It's Computer Human Interaction Conference, very, very big conference, very well known among user interface experts. And it was a short paper, and it was actually one of my first papers as a graduate student at University of Colorado at Boulder. And I was at that time very much interested in systems that would basically enhance your work environment, and in this case, I was focusing on tool discovery. So back then in '95, everything, at least in the university environment, was very much a Unix environment, and so you had lots of Unix tools. You didn't have really any bitmapped user interfaces, right? And so, but a lot of everything was command line. And so there was a large variety of tools that people used that were available, but that actually nobody had a really good idea of all those tools, right? And so I was actually inspired by a friend of mine in Germany who is a goldsmith, and he was teaching other, aspiring goldsmiths how to do this craft. And the way this was set up is there was a workbench, and he typically had like two people sort of following his work. They all sat at the same table, and it was very easy to see how things get done. It was like the how people use tools was very visible. And you compare this to like your typical computer environment, right? Everybody has their own screen. You don't actually see how the work environment of somebody else looks like, and so this was sort of my attempt to bridge that. And this tool discovery and user selection was, the system I called community help was essentially this idea is like, how can you build a system that collects data, but also interacts with the data and follows through on the data it discovers in a way that would make essentially how people use tools much more visible for everyone in a sort of structured way. And it had three parts. There was like tool discovery and user selection, right? So you discover new tools. On the network, you look at process tables and kind of look at, what's running and who's running it. Based on that, you locate the most knowledgeable user based on use frequency. And then you actually actively solicited users by sending them email and say, hey, I would like you to do an interview about this tool. I noticed that you use this tool a lot. And then based on that information and the interviewing, that was sort of an interactive process where the user would answer some questions and also kind of categorizes the tool in some kind of growing, freely editable hierarchy. Back then you didn't have tags yet, so there's like there's lots of stuff in here that it's not that important, but I'm just sort of showing this, that some of the ideas that were raised yesterday, for instance, at Tom's talk about sending regular newsletters. This could also be something that we can do when we sort of discover repositories, right? So obviously you can map this to, tools equates open source repositories, right? The discovery of these open source repository equates to the querying that Adam is going to talk about, and then the interviewing process. Well, that's maybe something that Georg knows about, analyzing these repositories, but you can also actually have some more interactive things where you actually directly interact with the users. All of this can be more or less automated, right? But it could also be just providing a lot of information that kind of regularly asserts itself by interesting news, right? And so so that's sort of the prompting I have. It's just sort of, when we started talking about this idea, it was actually not really until yesterday I made that connection to this much older work of mine. And it was actually Tom's remark that, you could do like regular newsletters about the discoveries. So I think that just sort of as a quick, I can send a link to the particular paper. It's just a 2-pager, very short, but it has a little bit more detail about how things were sort of implemented. So that's all I wanted to say. And I was wondering whether, so the next, I wonder whether Adam could maybe speak a little bit about how you discovered your repositories and what your thoughts are about, the discovery process of repositories.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can either go up there or I can
just share your slide. If you have any slides on Zoom, or then just share them on Zoom. And let me just get out of there. Any questions about this, what I just talked about? Community help?
I think one comment, and I think this was echoed in the chat as well, that I think the modern sensibilities about surveillance and privacy, I think might collide with some of this investigatory work.
Yeah,
I wanted to get a list of all the people getting emails from GitHub, and for operational improvement, it's not even for published research, and there's a really high bar to that now. And I think back in an earlier decade that we would have just done it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. This is like I don't want to derail this discussion of privacy, but it's obviously super important for this project, right? So, but I just wanted to really remark that, on one hand, people are totally fine to interact with Facebook and YouTube and, and get basically a ton of information or like use Google Maps. But on the other hand, there's like there's some sensibilities, right? And so, this was a big criticism back in '95. What about the privacy? And the response I had that this is strictly local, right? This is just a local lab, or you can scope it in any way. So we just had a scope to a department, right? And so, and people could opt out. So you could just basically say, I'm user so and so, please don't track me. Right. So I think, that's and I think that you ran into that too, with like, certain limitations of the API because of those very reasons.
Exactly. I'll mention those.
All right.
Right. So hi, everybody. I'm Adam Tillman from UC San Diego. I was earlier this year, there was a grant opportunity from the Sloan Foundation to set up OSPOs at individual institutions. So this was kind of a predecessor to the UC-wide effort that we're now talking about. And as part of that, one of the questions that was asked on the solicitation was, how many people use open source at your campus? And we had no idea. We had all sorts of ideas about what we could do to foster an open source community and to support that model of work, but we had only anecdotal data about who was actually making use or contributing to these tools. And so I started poking around on GitHub and just running as one example of a repository, and started running some searches, and that kind of turned into what I'm going to show you today. It is, as I say here, it is incomplete. It is, first of all, GitHub is not the whole world. And then also, as Carlos said, there are some limitations on the GitHub side that really restrict our view into activity there. And so our initial objectives in trying to survey the GitHub usage on the campus were we wanted to understand the people, the organizations, primarily research labs, and then the projects that they were contributing to. We were just hoping to come up with a list of a dozen or so, maybe, that we could put on that grant application. But even finding that much, those many examples, it was infeasible using the normal search interface. We would type in UCSD School of Engineering. We would type in people we knew, and we could come up with a few, but they weren't really representative of the campus as a whole. They were just the people that we knew. And so I went ahead and looked into the GitHub API, which I'll show you in a little bit. But my goals were really to identify those users, organizations, and projects. Those are kind of the primary, I guess, the base user types and activity contexts in GitHub. And then understand the activity, when they were created, when they were last updated, how many stars or likes they have on GitHub. And then I think kind of aspirationally, I was hoping that we could then start forming a network or a graph of collaboration and inside and outside the institution. I think the data's there. We didn't quite get to that. Any questions before I jump into some of the examples? Right, so this is an example of the data that we have available in GitHub, at least for a well-formed GitHub profile, one that is intentionally annotated to enable searching and discovery. This is, somebody thought about how can I enable people to find my lab at UCSD, and so they have titled themselves at UCSD. They've given themselves a UCSD location. They've given their UCSD URL. Their GitHub username includes the string UCSD, and I think searching for those indications of affiliation was the first step. And so just basically searching through all the fields and coming up with a list of candidate organizations. And it actually worked pretty well for research labs. For the most part, they want to be found. And their GitHub organization is part of their public-facing identity. We have many users, especially our grad students, though, that will simply throw in UCSD into their bio, and that's a great, that's a signal that they're affiliated somehow. But if I didn't know Parth personally, I would have no idea, is he active here? What is he now working at Google? And such that any of the activity might not be in scope for this research. That's actually what happened in a number of cases where we would see these markers of affiliation with the institution, but also we could tell from on inspection that this person has passed on. That they have an affiliation with the university that's probably worth noting, but if we're trying to get a sense of current campus users, we have to exclude them. And I think differentiating between these two cases, I think is going to require some human analysis, or maybe some well-trained machine learning models, or I mean, there may be other approaches. I think to begin with, I think a human could probably skim through and do the data cleaning and validation pretty quickly for a couple hundred to maybe 1,000 users. But I think if we were to look at the whole UC, we would want tools to enable that. This is the REST API that Google is. Oh yeah, this question into. Oh, absolutely. I think we could absolutely use the human validation as input into training and training the model. And I think that would be. I think we probably have enough examples, even just with the UCSD set, to get a start on that. That's a good point. So in the name of privacy and possibly in the name of protecting their commercial advantage, GitHub limits the number of search results that you can pull back from any particular query. They also rate limit the number of queries that can be made. And I bumped into both of these when scanning for these UCSD affiliates. And I bumped into them repeatedly because as you'll see in a minute, the broad searches will return reasonable results. If I search for UCSD, I'll get things that are relevant. And so for UCSD, I started with searching all of those different fields for any permutation I could come up with for related to the campus, and as well as specific location. So the location UCSD, location San Diego, et cetera. That would obviously be different for each campus. But that only turned up about a third of the total results that I found. That was not, most people are tying their affiliation, or I think their primary affiliation or primary loyalty is to the lab or to the center or to the school that they are associated with. And so for UCSD, I had to go through and I had to pull up the list of our research labs, our list of affiliated institutions, et cetera. I had to curate a much longer list. And actually what I put here on the screen, that I know see that's not quite readable. This is actually the list that I put together for UC Santa Cruz. I know nothing about UC, well, I got lost here, so that tells you the level of familiarity with the campus. But it really takes somebody with local knowledge to build up a list of heuristics that make sense for that institution. And we are those lists of affiliated institutions and centers and the like. Those are constantly changing. I would expect you probably see a new one each week here in some form at Santa Cruz and at other campuses. But anyhow, that's it was a combination of the of that broad search to get an initial lay of the land, and then using that to inform the more detailed search terms and search categories that led to the data that I was able to pull up. I'm actually just going to show what I pulled up for Santa Cruz, because I think this is more representative of kind of the raw output of that sort of search process. And so in the course of searching for UC Santa Cruz and all of those other search terms, I found 149 organizations that were seemingly connected to the campus. One problem that I ran into, though, was that there's a very prominent UCSC that is not this UCSC. And so, I think that would be this approach of searching based on keywords. I think it would be especially problematic for, say, UC Berkeley, where I think many people would simply refer to their institution as Berkeley. And I think that's where the machine learning and getting maybe looking a little deeper into either the content or the activity within the repository might help differentiate between those cases. And so the information that we get from about an organization or a user is fairly broad. If depending on what they have provided. And so we have their name, we have the GitHub URL, we have the bio that they have created, location. In some cases, they publish an email. There's not an option to search by email. I think, again, that's in the name of privacy on GitHub, but it is available after the data is pulled. And then I think the other two metrics, or the other four metrics, really that are most relevant when we're trying to prioritize people we want to reach out to, would be the number of public repos. Those are really the packages or the projects that they are hoping to share with the world. We don't know how many private repos they have, but anything public is at least potentially something they are intentionally putting out there for a broader consumption. We can tell the number of followers as a proxy for the number of collaborators. Maybe assume that people inside a group would not follow their own code, but you would have to study that a bit more. But then also the created and updated organizations. Those are really probably the best indicator of the health and the current relevance of that organization. And we see similar information for students, for users, and those could be undergraduates, graduates, postdocs, staff, faculty, etc. But you get similar information. And so we can see that we have an alum here, so wouldn't be in scope, but they've got several public repos and an interesting set of followers. Final bit of information I just want to share is the information that we can pull down about the individual repositories. And so these are the single projects that are, or the individual projects that are linked to either these users or organizations. And so we get a little bit of information about those projects, in addition to the creation and update time. And I haven't dug into what distinguishes an update. I guess whether a push constitutes an update, but certainly the push date, the last date where code or content was pushed to the repository. I think that's another significant indicator of relevance to the world, as well as watcher count, and you get a bit more information. Last item that I want to mention here. So GitHub does a decent job of trying to associate a license with the code that's been published. And one of the concerns at UCSD is people on their own adopting licenses like GPL v3, which the campus is very concerned about patent clauses and the like. And so I see this as a way early on to look for, here's a GPL v3. Now, I mean, that may be okay. That may be an individual user writing code that is owned by them, and the university has no interest in it. But it's at least it's an opportunity to investigate a little bit further, and maybe have some outreach from somebody in either the IT world or the research compliance or whatever organization.
Yeah.
Exactly. So totaling all that up, I think would give us a decent picture of one sliver of GitHub activity on a campus. As I said at the beginning, this is by no means a comprehensive view, and some real human labor is going to be involved to interpret this data to determine, are these current affiliates? Which affiliates are they? GitHub usernames may have no association or link to a human identity or a campus identity, and then also, are those repositories relevant? We found 32,000 repositories at UCSD that were linked to either UCSD users or labs. Most of them, and I haven't gone through in any systematic way, but most of them appear to be student homework assignments that they have created over the years that they sent public just because that's the default. And so, yes, if you're really interested in forking a copy of PA2 from CSE 110 from fall of 2020, it's out there. But that is, and so I think some work is needed to try to filter those results. And I don't think there's any way we could work with a 30,000 repository set in any meaningful way. I think we have to get that down to the hundreds or maybe even the dozens to really, if we're going to focus on either interventions or publicity or engagement with those projects, we're going to have to cut that down significantly. And that's I think machine learning, I think matching the users and organizations to the roles on the institution. If they're an undergraduate, we might have a different set of thresholds for taking a look at that repository. But at the end of the day, it's the users are in control over what they upload, what they call it, the data that they provide, what information about themselves they provide. And so I think we're going to have to look at this as one tool amongst many. I think we're going to need the investigation that you were describing, Carlos, where maybe we do start with those email logs somehow, everybody getting a GitHub email, find a privacy sensitive way to do that. So we can kind of hit it from both sides.
Thank you, Adam. So I think that I think you set up the stage for Georg to tell us what's possible today. Can we deal with 32,000 repositories, or do we have to manually whittle them down? Or, what are sort of the tools of the trade of repository analysis?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Adam, for sharing the work that you've done in identifying the people, the organizations and projects associated with the university. That is a very challenging task. And going through the search, you get some, but I'm sure there are also some that don't show up because they don't use those identifiers. And coming up with strategies to still capture those, maybe even asking, hey, can you please identify your projects, your open source work in the labs, the students, the faculty? There might be other strategies that need to be employed as well to get a complete picture. So Bitergia as a company, I'll start there because we also have a university background. And then I'll talk about the tool that we have. And then Karsten put an interesting idea into the chat about looking at collaboration networks. And so I have some thoughts on that and some screenshots to share. Bitergia is a company that is now more than 10 years old, with more than 15 years of history dating back to university research. The primary goal at the time was to understand how is software built in open source projects? How is it possible when volunteers come together that they produce high quality software? And there were no tools to analyze this. So the research team built its own tools and open sourced them. There was enough interest from companies and foundations at first to have this insight to how our open source projects doing that Bitergia was viable as a business. And we've been doing this now for 11 years. The tools that we have built are just, we have retooled a few times, and the core of Bitergia is really about the data and understanding open source, understanding how the data fits together and what stories the data can tell us. And so when we think about analyzing open source projects, one of the first things that we always ask our customers is, what do you actually care about? What are your goals? Not what do you care about in the projects, but why do you need to know answers about the open source project? And for a company, we need revenue. We need to find new customers. We need to know, is this tool that we are looking at using supported? Will it be supported in the future? We've learned that project health is a particular interest. And when we go back to Heartbleed as a vulnerability that got really a lot of attention, or the Log4j incident that ruined Christmas not too long ago for a lot of administrators, understanding vulnerabilities that come out of open source has sparked a lot of interest in understanding how open source projects are doing. So we have a suite of tools, and we also started building a community around understanding open source projects and analyzing them. And this is the CHAOSS project, CHAOSS, Community Health Analytics in Open Source Software. It's a community of practice of researchers, of organizations, of foundations, of maintainers in open source that come together to build out standards on how do we look at open source projects. How do we count commits? Do we count every commit that is in the Git log, or do we count only those that make changes to the source code? What about merge commits? There's a lot of questions that when we start analyzing open source projects that need to be answered. And so I invite you all to join CHAOSS if you are interested in analyzing open source projects. They're great conversations. And we also built out standard tools to analyze open source. One of them is Grimoire Lab, the tool that Peturgia initially built. And we built out metric definitions, and we have context working groups where you can learn from open source program offices, from universities, from the app ecosystem on what are they interested in looking at when we look at open source projects. So that is kind of the space that I'm coming from, and I wanted to give you that context so you can better understand my position and my bias. Like Carlos said, we all have our biases, and it's good to put them on the table. So this session is talking about value and risk and quantifying and qualifying it. And when I think of value in open source, or the value of open source, I think of different things that open source does, and we can build metrics around those. And I'm going to share a screen real quick with a slide that we've built in the CHAOSS project. So when we look at university research as one of the functions where open source is important, there are different goals that we have for it. And in CHAOSS, we like to follow the goal, question, metric approach. And with Peturgia, we've been using this with our customers very successfully to identify what are the meaningful metrics that we need to pay attention to. So using that, we identified several goals: research excellence, research translation, education, and also distribution and community. And for each of those, we can identify, okay, what specifically do we need to know about this? So for example, for research excellence, we want to improve research reproducibility and replicability. And open source provides clear value here, because knowing or having the source code available and not just the research outputs allows someone else to use the same tools. And the open source licenses provide those freedoms and guarantee that someone else can use the software. Of course, there's a lot of issues with reproducibility that go beyond licensing, but open source helps. So we have all of these different value propositions. I don't want to go into all of them, just want to give it as a brain teaser, maybe for the discussion if you like later. We can also think about the risk that we can have in open source. And in my way of thinking about the health of an open source project, The risk of university open source projects is, and this is a selection, we can discuss if this is complete or there may be others. The project health, if we define it as the potential to continue developing quality software, there are several areas where risk is inherent in the way that universities work. One is continuity of contributors. If we are relying on graduate students, they will graduate, they will get a job, they won't have the time to stick around long term. If we have resources tied to funding projects that go for 2, 3, 5 years, the funding dries up, what's going to happen? How is that open source project going to be maintained long term? We also have the ideal that if we use open source, we can share the source code between departments, between institutions, share the risk with others. And so that collaboration, and this is something Karsten had pointed to in the chat, is important, but we need to understand it and foster that actively. One is a reward system, open source contributions. I've not seen very many examples, if any, of where that factors into tenure and promotion at universities. So the incentives of actually maintaining open source long-term is maybe not there. Also, there's in open source in general, someone who creates a new project is the hero, but someone who picks up someone else's project and maintains it long-term, they get less recognition for that really hard and important work. So those are some thoughts that I have on value and on risk. And I want to shift gears for a second, looking at collaboration and network analysis, because that is something that once we have that data that Adam, you showed, collecting all of the repositories and knowing who all the contributors are at the university, there's a lot of insights we can gain by analyzing that. And this is some work that we've done using the Grimoire Lab tools that we have at Bitergia. And when we visualize how contributors are engaged with repositories or with projects, we can see certain topologies. And these are real-world examples from real-world open source projects that we are working with. And so we conceptualize each dot as a developer that is making a commit into another node repository. And so what we can see is some projects are isolated. You know, these might be some student projects that were spun up, but they didn't integrate with anything else. Or we can have like continents where projects are, there might be a research lab where everyone is helping each other, and we can see collaboration forming around the common goals that are set up. We can see projects that have a lot of outside contributors, maybe coming from not even the university, and being able to show that we can use in funding proposals, saying, hey, we are being really good at building a community around this tool. We need more support to do community management as part of our research project and supporting this long term. We can have high density and lighter areas, and we can think about, okay, why is this the case? Silos, we can maybe see across colleges that they work completely separate, or we can see that they're integrated, working well together. So anyway, we have all of these different ways that we can look at open source projects, and we can analyze them. I just want to give you a brain teaser, some of things that came to mind listening to what you all had shared. Happy to discuss more and talk more about similar veins and interests.
Thank you, Georg. This is awesome. So I like to just, we're kind of short on time. very surprisingly to me, but this is there's so much great topics for discussions. And I hope we can actually also continue to discuss these online after this session. I want to give the floor to Jennifer and hear about her project Orca. I think she is there's such a great other design point in this space. And so Jennifer, please go ahead. I just want to very quickly introduce Jennifer as like someone I met in this great work group at the open source science that Alexei Krabrov and others at IBM and NumFocus are organizing, which is there's a work group for mapping out open source and science. So just creating this map, and I think her work is sort of a big step towards that vision. So thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks for the very kind introduction and the opportunity to speak with you all. I think I can keep this pretty short, so I'll leave plenty of time for discussion at the end. I'll share my screen. All right, can you see slides?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I promise I will blaze through these. Yeah, so I'm Jennifer Malo. I'm the technical lead at the Emerging Technology Observatory at the Center for Security and Emerging Technology. This talk contains just a little bit of information about what CSET and the ETO are. I'll talk to you about Orca, which is our open source research software explorer tool, which is somewhat relevant to the problems you all are interested in. And I think we're hoping to make it more relevant going forward. And then I'll just talk about what we're planning for next steps on our tool and maybe possible opportunities for collaboration / we would love the data that we saw from UC earlier in this presentation. Yeah, so the Center for Security and Emerging Technology, we study the national security implications of emerging technologies. We kind of started out with artificial intelligence, but now also study advanced computing, biotech, cybersecurity, and so on. Our core audience is policymakers, and a lot of our reports are on geopolitical issues. We're part of Georgetown's School of Foreign Service, but unusually for a think tank, we have a pretty sizable data team. And so our emerging technology effort builds public resources. So that's mostly software tools, but also data sets to inform decisions on emerging technology issues. So our team is very small. I co-lead it with an analyst, Zach Arnold, and then I lead a very small team of 2 software engineers. We have a blog. We have support available for our resources if these things are of interest. We have 6 tools out right now. I won't go through these in great detail, but they span everything from a Chinese science and technology news notification service to a bibliometric data explorer, and then our Orca tool. Okay. So Orca is a tool that compiles data on open source software that is used in science and technology research, including in many AI and computing domains. So we're very much aware of the CHAOSS project and have cribbed many of our metrics from that project. So we include metrics related to the CHAOSS metrics on usage, health, development activity, and community engagement for these projects. This is a screenshot of one of the views, but I think I can just quickly do a little demo. Yeah, so this is a public tool. You can go to orca.eto.tech later if you're interested. It has 3 views. So this initial view gives you kind of summary statistics for the top 5 repositories in a research field. So right now, the selected research field is artificial intelligence. I'll explain later how we're associating repositories with these research fields, but just take it for granted for now that we have a method of doing this. These boxes at the top are like the top 5 repositories in this research area, ordered by a relevance metric, ordered by stars, ordered by number of contributors. And then we allow users to compare the top 5 repositories according to different metrics, according to their commits over time, like the percentage of commits by the top 20 contributors to the project, and so on, these health and activity metrics. You can switch the view to the list view. And this lets you browse like the 347 repositories that we think are related to artificial intelligence, and then just kind of quickly compare according to this graph on the right, these repositories. So right now the graph is commits over time, but you could switch it to something like new versus returning contributors over time, or like this one's a little tricky to explain, but the percentage of contributions that are being made by each contributor ordered by that fraction. So you can kind of see which projects are mostly being worked on by like one person or a few people. You can also, again, this is sorted by relevance right now, which is a kind of TF-IDF-ish metric that we're using, but you can also sort it by things like just number of mentions in research, the last commit date, other metrics that are of interest. And yeah, the relevance filter just kind of, it surfaces interesting things in these fields of study. A lot of the most relevant repositories in artificial intelligence are related to like AI explainability, which is kind of cool. It's just something that kind of came out in the data. So this is like Alibi, so explainability repo. There's like SHAP, which is also explainability. Anyway, it's kind of a side point. But finally, if you go to the detailed view of one of these repositories, you can see the same statistics that we provide for comparison, but you also get to see the top cited articles that mention this repository. So this might be interesting if you're like a research software engineer and you're trying to say like this, my project is cited in by these papers that have themselves like a ton of citations. It's like really impactful piece of work perhaps. And you can also see, again, these different health and activity metrics. So going back to this presentation. So how do we build this? So CSET maintains a merged deduplicated corpus of scholarly literature. This includes articles from 6 different sources. Some of the bigger ones are like Clarivate Web of Science, Semantic Scholar, OpenAlex. We also have papers with code, archive, and something I'm forgetting. Anyway, so we merge these and deduplicate them. And then we affiliate with each English article field of study labels. This is, we have like a scholarly publication on this if you're interested, but I can pass that along. But this is based on work that the Microsoft Academic Graph did in the past before that became defunct. So from this corpus, we retrieve paper repo links by searching the article free text. So that's the title, although, I mean, of course, it hardly ever comes up in the title, the abstract, and then most helpfully the full text of papers when that's available, as well as DOI links that we extract from GitHub READMEs and paper repo links from papers with code. So once we have this set of paper repo links, we group repos by the fields of study of articles that mention them. And then we display these metrics, and these metrics are coming from GitHub Archive, the GitHub API, PyPI, OpenSSF, and so on. We have documentation online if that's of interest. Here are just like some sample questions that people could potentially use Orca to start investigating. We don't claim to be comprehensive. Full text is where we get a lot of our paper repo affiliations, and those are only, and full text is only available for a relatively small fraction of our corpus, for example, but we still think it's a useful tool. And then, yeah, upcoming work. So for the rest of this year, we're planning to just kind of make Orca more open, both in terms of the data and the code. So adding data exports, automating monthly data updates, so we don't have to do that manually, and open sourcing the code. We also have a project that is running kind of slowly in parallel where we're asking like Georgetown student annotators to extract funding mentions from repos. So like both the funder, like NSF or whoever, but also the grant ID when that's available. We're hoping to use this initial set of data to train a machine learning model to extract it at scale. But we just wanted to have like a manually labeled set of ground truth first. We're also hoping to add some dependencies, since we've heard some from potential users that would be of interest. So not just like research repositories, but also dependencies of those repos. And then, yeah, we're also interested in this institutional affiliation question. Like right now, we could add affiliations of citing papers because that's just part of our corpus, but that's maybe less interesting to people. Maybe people are less interested in like which repositories people at UC Santa Cruz use in their research versus like which repositories are coming from UC Santa Cruz, which is a much more difficult problem to approach. We also have another manual annotation effort to get data for the latter problem, but it is difficult and going slowly. Yeah, so that's it. I mean, I can go into more detail if people are curious about any of this, but if you'd like to follow up later, my contact info is here. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This is fantastic. I want to actually use this to just thank all the speakers so far. So we haven't really given them applause. Thank you so much. So yeah, so I think as a lead-in, your presentation, Jennifer, is actually am I understanding correctly? You use basically the publication record as sort of the primary lead-in to the repositories that you want to look at.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, so that's and I think that's actually I think that's a fantastic idea, because that might actually also solve campus-specific information, right? Because you can actually it might be easier to find all the publication associated with a campus, authors from a campus, right, than to actually find repositories that are associated to a campus. And then more importantly, you can actually find the repositories that actually have already some record in the publication world. And so there's also sort of built-in relevance in some sense, right? I don't know, that sort of remains to be seen, whether we would miss really important repositories, because not everyone, at least not yet, right, is necessarily including the software artifacts in their papers. But I think it's a really great start, and I think that that might be something that we would be very interested in collaborating with you and actually getting, the tooling started for that, and just try and see whether we can actually, with a slightly different question, where we basically start with the campus, but we go through the publication record of that campus and then find the repositories associated with that. And I think that data set is also really valuable for the other things that we're thinking. So I want to actually point out, later today at 2:50 Pacific time, that's unfortunately 5:50 your time, Jennifer, there's a workshop, actually a panel that Alvaro Cardez, who's in the background here, organizing. He's just off camera. And so he's he's going to look at possible ways of finding the risks of open source software within the university, by looking at the supply chain security and some of the and developing a threat model for the university. So that's a session that I highly recommend for anyone who's interested in this space. It's like 5:50 Eastern time. On the same, is it actually track 1 or track 2? I forgot.
It's track 1. I think it's in the same room.
It's track 1, so it's in this room, the same Zoom link. Yeah. So, but I think, yeah, this is so any other reactions, questions?
Well, I had a quick question. I think I was still driving here when I heard you talking about this, but you mentioned something I hadn't considered before, and it's privacy. So you're doing all these searches, and I mean, presumably, yeah, I guess it's public data, but maybe we're finding things that authors might not want to have, or we're not expecting to have online, or maybe their homework, as you said, like is there and it can be used. They're not aware that this might impact them. Like, do you have more examples of privacy? I think the homework might be one, but
so I don't have any concrete examples.
Yeah.
I had a brief conversation with a couple of folks on our campus that are charged with understanding and monitoring privacy concerns. But no, I think the main issue would be that we are using data that they published for a particular purpose for a different purpose. And I think that pivot is fast on its way to becoming worthy of discussion. And I think just because it's out there, do we have the right to use it? And I think I can imagine many different opinions on that subject, but I think it's something we're going to have to discuss as we start pulling in more and more data to help inform these new areas of work that we're building.
I'd be happy to add a few thoughts on that if you'd like to hear my thoughts.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so when the general data protection regulation, GDPR, was released in Europe. Bitergia is a Spanish company, so we had to work with lawyers to figure out how do we analyze open source projects in a compliant way. And there are, when it comes to data privacy in GDPR, there are two ways to get permission to analyze someone's and process someone's personal identifiable information. One is opt-in and one is opt-out. Opt-in is the more safer way for everyone, but it's not feasible in open source for various reasons. Opt-out requires an analysis of risks to the individual and the benefits for why we want to do this. And when we work with open source foundations and projects and companies, we have to make the analysis of what is the risk to the contributors when we process their information in ways that they did not consent to initially, and what is the benefit to the ecosystem, to the project, for the institution for having this information. And we then provide a way to opt out, and that is anonymizing the data or putting someone on a list that this person, when they show up, doesn't get processed their personal information. And so that's one way we do this. And then the other thing we did was retool the tools where in the public facing dashboards, all personal identifiable information is removed except for the name, but email addresses, locations, and so on, that is removed into a separate database that requires admin access. And so there are several things that we can do to make it compliant with the current regulations. The last thing I want to add here is there is an expectation from contributors when they work in open source that everyone can see their work. When it comes to analyzing that, there is a lot of apprehension if done in a way that seems sneaky or behind their back. So being upfront about it is the best policy that we've seen, and we have had very few requests from contributors that said, hey, I don't want to be part of this. When the community manager or someone said, hey, we're starting to analyze this, well, here's the dashboard, you can see what data we're looking at. We had very few requests in the beginning, but now in the last 2-3 years, we haven't had anyone say, please, I want to opt out.
Thank you, Georg.
I guess I have a question for your presentation, Carlos.
Yes.
I really liked it, by the way. I think like the whole topic of like data sharing and forming like a knowledge base, you know, between researchers and like university staff is like an important topic. And I don't know, I can't help it. This might diverge from research a little bit, but I can't help but think that like a lot of like communication that happens between like university affiliated people happens on like online private platforms like Reddit or Discord or like Facebook or things like that.
Yeah.
I think that's just kind of a little bit sad because, and not necessarily that it's a bad thing, but I feel like similar to how like the university provides like, you know, a physical location for, you know, university people to like interact. I feel like there should be some sort of presence online. You know, the best equivalent, you know, the university might have is like email, you know. So I feel like that's something important to establish. And I guess the main question I have for you is like, you know, if there is a hypothetical platform that, you know, a university has for, you know, be it for researchers or undergraduate students or whatever, how do you like get buy-in from people to actually interact with this platform? One of the biggest problems is people, you know, tend to not, you know, even if it's superior, people don't like using something new. So how do you like get people to actually use this sort of platform? You know, you mentioned like your 1995 paper, it was like opt-in by default and people can opt out. You know, if you're in a university, you have some leverage to like, you know, enforce something like that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my observation was that, you know, people, and I think Carsten actually raised that earlier in the comment, is like when people are surprised, they're much more open because they become curious, right? And so if you can kind of plug into that and you can really offer something that people can perceive immediately as valuable or at least a curious thing, right? Something that they like to know more about. And then also give them agency. So that was like the thing that, I had this thing where, categorizing tools, but I made it in such a way where there was no right or wrong way to do that. And people could like completely change the entire taxonomy if they wanted to. But what actually happened is that some people kind of took it upon themselves and felt like being the authority of like putting a more global touch to the taxonomy. And other people said, oh yeah, this is like, Eddie Nemeth, who's like a Unix god at that time, right? She has clearly authority and she knows her stuff, so that's like, okay. But if somebody else did some really big changes who was not well known in the community, then there was sort of more critical and people would undo that. So I think there's it's a little bit the similar dynamics that we have maybe on Wikipedia, and if you can build in some of these things where like vandalism is very quickly undone, and valuable contributions kind of have a better chance to survive vandalism, then that's sort of a way of creating a very distributed model of coming to some kind of consensus. The other thing is also hierarchy turns out to be like a really bad way of doing this, because it's more like a graph or like a tag cloud or something, right? Since then, all these new concepts kind of evolved from that. And I think there's sort of many ways of mapping things out. Today, you see actually much fewer hierarchies and much more like a map, a landscape, right? And more of the dependencies between these things. Again, it's really about giving everyone, first of all, like giving everyone a sort of an immediate sense there is something they haven't seen before, they like to see, and then also here is a way of making things better. And so in some sense, it's actually Wikipedia, right? It's the Wikipedia effect that you really appreciate that people put in the work and you feel like you need to contribute as well.
I like that a lot. Finding a value for the proposition. I like the hierarchy part too, honestly. Yeah. No, I feel like that's very important. Kind of like a side note, but like, I don't know, my supervisor, he was a student here in 2018. He kind of talked about how like, he said a lot of university lore was kind of lost when like, the physical space shut down. And, a lot of like information would like transfer like by osmosis from like upperclassmen to lowerclassmen.
Yes.
Kind of got lost.
Yeah.
So, having a platform like that that's available for people to use, like, in the digital world, I think that could be very useful.
Yeah, and the things like Slack, they try to sort of fill that gap, but I think there is that's and I think when you look at how Slack is used, a lot of the conversations are private. So in that sense, that the value of Slack kind of goes away. It's just another private channel, right? And so there's a lot of the sort of orientation of other bystanders is not going to be enough. So so I would love to create sort of a new way of getting oriented, finding people, because it's in the end, it is really about connecting people in new ways, and it's not so much about the thing. It's really, wow, I didn't know, and then we see this again and again, right? We've been organizing these symposia for quite a few years, and every year we try to put together new people that might have never really interacted before, and they invariably say, I can't believe we're I've been around for like so many years, we've never heard of you, right? And so not only us, but also other people we bring together. So it's a very siloed world and the university, even in non-pandemic times. Of course, during the pandemic, that was even worse.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I'll open the floor for other questions.
So yeah, I guess I have a question for Jennifer. So she mentioned that she was interested in security, and your presentation didn't focus on that topic. I was wondering if you could expand. What are the security issues that you think you're moving forward in the future, or you're going to be looking at?
No, that's a good point. So yeah, my parent organization is definitely interested in national security issues. My specific team is a little bit less specifically focused on that. We're more aimed at helping decision makers understand what's going on with different emerging technologies, but the questions that they may have in mind may not just be national security ones, if that makes sense. I mean, as far as our Orca tool, like we don't have a ton of security related metrics in there. The only thing that comes to mind immediately is we have like the OpenSSF criticality score, which is only kind of tangentially security related. But if we heard that was of interest, we could look into adding more stuff of that nature.
Well, yeah, what is the criticality score that you have for OpenSSF?
I should probably just send a link so that you can read their methodology. I probably won't reproduce it very well, but it's a metric that they've come up with, which measures like, I guess, the centrality of a particular repository to the open source ecosystem. But let me just send you a link that will explain, I'm sure, better than I would.
Can you forward the link?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna, yeah. We will actually, we record all the chats.
Oh, okay.
And I will make sure that those are being captured.
Maybe also a different discussion. I'm interested in the repositories that you found at UCSC. Are you going to share with us those findings?
Oh, yeah, I'll certainly share those findings. And I think probably what I will do, just in the name of the UC-wide effort, I'll run at least a first cut at the other campuses within the UC system. And then Jennifer, I'd be happy to share that data. You know, I think it's it's all in the open, you know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we would love it.
I want to reiterate, we're very interested to collaborate with you, Jennifer. I think it will be fantastic if we can find, you know, a way to share tools and data, and I think that, you know, the goals align really well. We haven't talked much about the new opportunities, but I think there are many, you know, of enriching essentially campus life, enriching the life at the university, of, you know, creating statistics that will basically tell policymakers within the university, you know, the role of open source better, and then also make the universities able to really engage in these policies, into this legislation discussions, you know, protecting essentially the open source component of the research. Right? So we're unfortunately out of time. But thank you so much for attending this session. This was incredibly inspiring and valuable for me. I hope for everyone else as well. And let's stay in touch, and we will create a forum where we can discuss things further. And in the meantime, we can also, if you have any follow-up questions, there's a question and answer document for these sessions. They are on the agenda. And so please feel free to just exchange there, and we will also copy and paste the comments in this chat, the public ones, not the private ones. So, all right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.